Hello YouTube. This video is about what's in the trunk of this car, or more importantly, what's not in the trunk of this car. We have no floor, and we also have an interference in between the braces that we added and the original body of the car. So I think I have a plan for the floor. The first thing we got to do is cut out a notch here so that this body will sit further down on the frame. Let's mark where the notches have to go. We'll use the engine hoist to pick the back of the car up to give us some clearance on those brackets. So here we go. We haven't cut quite enough out. It doesn't really matter because I'm going to cut that whole lip off. So I'm going to cut a little more and jack the body back up. We'll cut a little more. And try again. We have the body sitting down on the frame. We've put 6 of the body bolts in. They go through the body and into the frame. The next thing I want to do is get rid of this punky piece of metal. That piece of metal is literally sitting on the frame right here. So what we're going to do is put the body bushings in, which are 3/8 of an inch thick, all the way around, and that'll lift the body up off the frame. With the body lifted up off the frame with the engine hoist again, we can insert these pads in, and when we go all the way around, we'll have the whole body lifted 3/8 of an inch off the frame. That'll give us clearance to cut that panel out. With all the body cushions in place, we now have space between the body and the frame here, so I can cut this off. This is a subframe member underneath the sheet metal. So what I want to do is draw a line from this edge of the frame out here. And what I've done is drill a hole right at the edge of the frame out here so I know where it's at. And now we're going to draw a line from here to here, then we'll cut from here to here, and we'll draw another line across here, and we'll make sort of a square piece for our patch. So we'll draw our line. That'll tell me where to cut here, and we'll draw a line here, kind of an arbitrary line, right before the bend. And we'll cut right there, and we'll butt weld the whole thing. So here we go. Let's see if we can get it out. All right, now we got a piece and a pattern to follow. I've taken our piece that we cut out and laid it on some 18 gauge steel, and we'll mark it out. Clean up the line a little bit. We'll cut on the outside of the line so it'll be a little big, and we can trim it down. So here we go. Let's see how we did. Not bad. It's a little big. We can trim it down. It'll certainly be weldable. We need to take a little bit off right here. We'll take that first. Now let's see how it fits. Yeah, it fits nice. I think we can weld that. Let's clamp it in place. We have it clamped in places so that we can tack it, and then we'll move our clamps to get nice tight gaps. Now that we have it tacked in, we'll go around and weld it in. Let's grind it down a little bit and see what we got. This is what it looks like after a couple rounds of grinding and welding. For my first ever patch panel, I don't think it turned out too bad. This right here, the sheet metal is completely rotted away and you're seeing the subframe. I'm going to have to make a little patch and cover that. And this is the hole for the body bolt. I think we have a good enough foundation to move forward with the floor. This is what we plan to do for the trunk. We don't want to have to replace this panel here. That's a lot of work. We have to clear the coilover brackets. What I plan to do is surround the whole trunk with 3/4 inch tube. If the floor is at the level of the top of the 3/4 inch tube, I have clearance on those brackets. It clears the brackets, it doesn't touch them. The floor would be at the level of the bottom of this tube. I can then cut this right out because it's not needed. And we'll have a piece of 3/4 inch tubing running right on the top of there. And the floor will be on that. Because we're surrounding the whole trunk with 3/4 inch tube, I've sealed this whole area. The question comes up, if I raise the floor 3/4 of an inch, do I have room for the fuel cell and the battery box? If we take our 3/4 inch tube and put it at the bottom and set a 3/4 inch tube on top of it and put another bar in, we can set our battery box and fuel cell on there. I'll put the fuel cell upside down because of the sump, and the battery box in on this side. And let's call this trunk and see if it closes. It closes without hitting. And that's because this comes up like this. Let's get started. We do have to make another small patch panel for right here. I won't keep you around for that, I'll just get it done, and then we'll start on the square tubing. We've completed patching all the holes that were in the floor pan of the trunk. We're now ready to start laying the 3/4 inch tubing around the perimeter of the trunk. I've ground all the way around so I have good wheel contact. This tube is going to have to be bent for this corner right here. What we'll do is we'll slice the back side of the tube so we can make that bend. This is our first piece of 3/4 inch tubing. I've marked the center of it right here. And the curves start 29 inches apart. So I've marked that. It's 14.5 inches from the center to the first cut. The curve goes for 7 inches. I've marked off 1/2 inch increments and we'll make our slices there. Here we go. Got a couple more to go. The closest thing I found was the cylinder on the welding tank. So let's just bend this around that. Let's see how that fits. Here we go. I think we're in the ballpark. We have the clearance for these brackets now. There's no spot welds in this area of the bracket, so we'll just cut off the corner of the bracket and then tack it there and tack it there. It'll be stronger than it ever was. So here we go. There we go. Does it fit? Well, it fits at the top, but we got a little problem here. We're going to have to bend those tubes down. With the tube centered in the car on the center line, let's put a couple tacks on it and work our way around. If I don't like it, I can always take it back off. Move our clamps. With that part of the perimeter tacked in, let's make sure we're going to clear these coilover brackets. And we do. The floor has a bend in it right here. It's flat to here and flat there on. Rather than do the same thing for bending the tube here, we'll cut short pieces of tube right to that length and then continue on with another straight piece. These two short pieces have been tacked in place. These two pieces are the next pieces to be tacked in. As we put each piece in, we make sure that they're running straight. We make sure that the distance between them remain the same, which is 40 3/4 inches. What remains to be done to these two pieces is we have to cut them to length to match the tubing that'll run across the back of the trunk. Here we are tacking in the last of the perimeter pieces. Now we can start cutting out some of this excess metal. That looks a lot better. We have finished welding in the perimeter and cutting out all the bad metal. We're ready to move on to the next step, which is welding in the cross members to support the floor. We have cut and placed our cross members. There's a gap between each cross member and the perimeter so that we can get good penetration on our welds. This one is not spaced evenly because we have to leave a space between the shock bracket and the cross member. We'll weld these two in place. This one we'll take back out because what we're going to do is run a 3/4 inch piece of tube from here to here and here to here, and then have this one come to that cross member and this one come to that cross member, because we have to leave room for the sump on the fuel cell. We've put a bevel on the end of each of the cross members, and there's a little bit of a gap so that we get good penetration, and we've cranked the welder up. So here we go. We're going to tack them in place. Now we can take the clamps off and weld them in. A little grinding so the floor will set flat. We've located the fuel cell and the battery box where we want them. They're evenly spaced apart and from the ends of the floor. The trunk can be closed and it doesn't hit. The fuel cell and the battery box are currently sitting 3/4 of an inch higher than they will sit on the floor because they're sitting on top of the tubing that I have laid across the perimeter. We have to cut this cross member because of the sump and the fuel pump. What we want to do is cut this cross member such that the tube that we put in, running from here to here, runs in the center of this groove. That way we can bolt the fuel cell right to the cross member. After a few calculations, we've located the bars that we want to put in such that they're in the center of where the straps for the fuel cell go. After some cutting, fitting, and welding, the subfloor is complete. I did make some design changes on the fly. I added this bar here to the design so it would be flat. There's a transition between this plane and this plane. There's going to be a bend right there, so that'll support both sides of the bend. I also added these bars here so that I could bolt the battery directly to the subframe. The battery box fits now over the top of those subframes, and I can bolt it directly to the subframe through the bottom of the battery box. The fuel cell fits into its place, and the brackets will bolt right through the subframe, and there's clearance between the fittings and the subframe so that I can remove them without having to take the fuel cell out. We're now ready to move on to the next phase, which is making a template for the floor and cutting out the metal. I've taken some railroad board and laid it over our subframe for the floor. And now what we're going to do is carefully cut out the edge of the subfloor so that we have a pattern. I'm using a very sharp new razor blade and just going around the perimeter. And we'll end up with a pattern. This top edge was not perfectly square, so I've overlapped the board, and now we'll just cut that. And as I cut through the tape, I'm taping the edge as I go so the board stays tight. This corner is going to be hard because I'm right-handed and I have to reach all the way in. What's nice about this railroad board is I can pull the tape off and it doesn't tear the paper. With all the tape removed from the edges of our pattern, we can remove it from the trunk. My plan is to mark off a 1/4 inch all the way around, so the pattern is now a 1/4 inch shorter all the way around, so that I can weld on the top rather than the side. So let's mark off a 1/4 inch and draw the line. And we'll do that all the way around. We'll use a compass set to a 1/4 inch to make our corner here. Now what we have to do is cut out the perimeter, and I'll cut it on the outside of the mark so that if it's a little long, I can still trim it down. If we cut too much off, we're out of luck. With our pattern cut out, we'll do a test fit. This line represents where the bend will be in the floor. So let's go try it in the trunk. Here's a test fit. And it looks good to me. We have a nice reveal all the way around. Certainly weldable. Next step is to lay it out on a piece of metal and cut it out. Here we have a brand new piece of metal, and we'll wipe it down with some paint thinner to clean all the oil and junk off of it. And if you don't believe that there's junk on a brand new piece of metal, look at that. And I haven't done the whole floor, a whole piece yet. So I'd say that's pretty dirty. We don't want to try to weld through that. We'll lay our pattern on it and utilize this straight edge here so we don't have to cut that. We don't want it to move, so we'll tape it in position. Take a nice new marker so we get a nice fine line. and mark the template. Remove the tape. I like this railroad board. It works really well. It's stiff enough, and you can peel the tape off of it. And reveal our cut line. I could cut this with a bandsaw, but I won't be able to cut that line or that line with a bandsaw. So I'm just going to go ahead and use a cutoff wheel and cut the line. These corner cuts are the hardest, but if you take your time, you can cut it with a cutoff wheel. Now what we'll do is go around the edge with a flap disc to take the scale and the sharp edge off. We'll flip it over and do the other side. Now we'll get the edge. Let's go see how it fits. We're nice around the edges, across the top, around the corners, but we're a little tight here at the bottom, particularly right here. So we're going to trim that off a little bit. We'll make this trim cut with a grinder. Now we have to put the bend in here that goes across there, and I don't have a break that size. What I'm going to do is mark where it's supposed to be on this side, and do the same thing on the other side. We'll transfer these marks to the back side because I think it's easier to push down than it is to pull up. We'll take a straight edge and mark that line. What I've done is taken some square tubing and clamped it to the workbench. One on top, one on the bottom. This is 18 gauge metal. It's not going to bend easy, but let's try. You don't have to go too far. There's not that much of a bend in the floor. Let's test that and see what we got. Cross your fingers. Put the floor on the marks. That's good. It's nice and solid. Now what I have to do is crawl underneath with a marker and mark where all the cross members are so I can drill holes for rosette welds. So this is what the underside looks like. I've marked off where all the cross members are, and I've marked off evenly spaced intervals where I'm going to put the rosette welds. Now I have to punch each location and drill a hole in each location. Well, we certainly drilled a lot of holes. It certainly should hold the floor in place. I think we're at a point where we're going to start plug welding these holes up here. The bottom half has had the scale ground off. The top half has not, but you can see the rosette welds have been ground off. I'm not worried about the scratches caused by the grinder because when the trunk is all done, I'm going to paint it with trunk splatter paint. What's left to be done is weld around the perimeter. We have all the rosette welds ground down and the scale removed, and now we're starting to work our way around, welding about every 6 inches or so that we don't burn through, and this is going to take a while. Well, we've got the perimeter pretty well welded up. Took a long time. We're going to grind it now and see what we've got. When we ground the perimeter off, we found that when you lay a piece of metal on top of another piece of metal and then weld it, a lap joint, you get a real ugly edge. And what I'm having to do is to go back and weld between the ugly edge and the edge of the 3/4 inch tubing. And when I do that, I put a bevel in and it doesn't look too bad. We've gone all the way around, added weld, ground it down, and I think it looks better than what it did with all that ugly weld sticking out. Well, I think we've accomplished what we set out to do. We filled the hole that was in the trunk floor. We've got a structure underneath the floor that'll accept the fuel cell and the battery. It's built of 18 gauge steel, and they want 024. 18 gauge steel is 043, so it's thick enough. If you enjoyed this video, there'll be more.